Our next session is on diversity and inclusion. The moderator will be Jim Dunn, Editor-in-Chief for Canada of the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health. And just to highlight one particularly interesting part of his biography is that he is a co-PI for the evaluation of the Ontario Basic Income Pilot, a 5-year study on the impact of guaranteed annual income or basic income on poverty, health, and community outcomes among 6,000 participants in 3 communities in Ontario. So what an interesting project. Jim, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Thank you very much. It's a great opportunity to be here. I really appreciate the invitation and looking forward to this wonderful panel on diversity and inclusion. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, everybody's coming up. I thought I would just make some remarks a little bit as coming from an international context. As was said, I'm from Canada and lead the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health. I wanted to start by just saying that the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health, our key focus is actually on social equity and health. And so this is a fitting panel for our emphasis. And we know that diversity and inclusion, and we had an allusion to this just at the end of the last session, are key issues in higher education across the world. And in my own institution, they might be a little bit different than they are in institutions in the US, so I thought I would just mention those briefly. One, of course, is ethno-racial diversity and inclusion is a very large issue. We're in the greater Toronto-Hamilton area, and it's an area where 50% of the population was born in another country. And since 1970, those countries have predominantly been non-Anglo, non-Western countries. And so as a result, the diversity issues that we face are diverse. So we also face a lot of issues around gender and sexuality that institutions are trying to incorporate into their daily practice and into teaching and so forth. And one of the very big things that is very top of mind for us and is being institutionalized in a number of different ways is around Indigenous groups. And Canada had a very extensive truth and reconciliation process that took place. And now there's actually a very heartening race almost amongst universities to figure out ways that they can incorporate Indigenous truth and reconciliation into our curriculum, into our research, and so forth. And it has been an immense and humbling learning experience, I have to say, to learn the ins and outs of issues that have largely been invisible, but in plain sight for me and my growing up in my entire life. So actually, on that notion, I thought it might be neat to so now one of the things that's very common when people are giving talks in our institutions in Canada is for people to acknowledge the territory that their meeting is taking place on. And so I wanted to look up the Indigenous territories that we are meeting on today, and they are from the Wampanoag tribes, including the Nauset, Nantucket, Pennacook, Pokanoket and Pocasset tribes, and I think it's worth acknowledging that we are sitting on their territory and we appreciate them hosting us. So I'm going to stop talking after about 10 more words, and I just want to acknowledge that there are, of course, incredibly complex bureaucratic, student and classroom, and community issues that we're facing in these, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panelists. And I want to start with Linda Alexander. And Linda is Senior Associate Dean for Academic, Student, and Faculty Affairs at the School of Public Health at West Virginia University. And her background is in tobacco-related diseases amongst underrepresented and socially disadvantaged populations. And she's going to speak to us about cultural competence. Thanks, Linda. Take it away.
Good morning. Those of you who know me know that I cannot be humorous, engaging, or have you participate in active learning if I don't use my notes. I'm really honored to be a part of this book project, and I think I want to do sort of a teaser or commercial for the book and talk a little bit about the context and nuances around the topic of teaching cultural competence. Think of my talk as a gilded frame for a rich tapestry that will be inserted when we hear from my colleagues on the panel, but also most of what you've heard today. If I can get this to work. Okay, this is not my first rodeo. In 2011, I was asked to co-lead an expert panel on cultural competence education convened by the then Association of Schools of Public Health and the Association of the American Medical Colleges. We focused then on developing cultural competence education around knowledge, attitudes, and skills. And our focus was on establishing the interdependence between medicine and public health. We wanted to accelerate team-based learning, and we wanted to stimulate further research in health disparities. That published report provides a great foundation for curricula development and remains relevant to several other disciplines that are represented here today. So this is how we define cultural competence, and I don't want to read this, but I want you to focus on the words ongoing, engagement, increase one's awareness, content knowledge, cognitive sophistication, empathic understanding. And I would try to use a pointer, but I'm good with just being able to advance these slides. So we embrace the idea that cultural competence education using this type of deliberate focus on personal awareness and cognition would give students an appreciation of the application of cultural competence. The thinking was that eventually this appreciation would be integrated at the individual and community level. And this is not intended as a criticism, but I think this is where cultural competence education, certainly this report and the rich content of this Teaching Public Health Symposium begins. The idea that students will appreciate and therefore apply cultural competence is likely not reasonable in the same way that calculating risk or developing a culturally relevant intervention is not intuitive. Cultural competence also should be more broadly defined. External to the accreditation process, the term cultural competence for me is a bit limiting. Think about your comfort level in a surgeon's office where she proudly displays a certificate with her name in Old English font, and then underneath is printed competent to perform brain surgery from 2010 to 2018. In other words, do you want your accountant to be competent or masterful on April 17th? Based on face value alone, it appears then that we are training students to be culturally competent, period. And then they are supposed to stop learning once this is achieved. A focus on cultural competence should include a discussion of terms, as well as the learning journey needed to apply culturally relevant information to public health dialogue, practice, solutions. We want students to be more engaged in diversity and empathic. Think about the words in this definition as part of a resume. We want our students to be focused on attaining a level of mastery that transcends getting the correct answers on an exam and inspires continual learning and preparation in this area. I'm going to skip this slide. I don't think I remembered that Dr. Georges Benjamin would be here, and he does this talk better than anybody I've ever seen. Teaching cultural competence. First of all, we need to establish an environment to enhance learning for successful teaching of cultural competence. All students can be cultural ambassadors by studying the history of the institutions they attend. A first assignment should be the examination of cultural norms, rituals, values, and their school's historical beliefs about who learns and under what conditions. Students should be required to investigate whether their institution was among the first to offer same-sex benefits, or investigate the number of undergrad women who filed a Title IX report and finished their education at the same institution, or seek information on the existence of quiet areas around their campus dedicated to prayer for extended periods. All participants in your course bring a unique set of cultural experience that can enhance the learning environment for you and for them. This morning, we've learned a lot about innovations in active learning, and we'll learn more and for the rest of the afternoon. Learning modalities that support peer inquiry or dialogue, or the creation of virtual communities can enhance learning that transcends a cognitive exercise to an important feeling component. I often need to remind myself to be aware of how we construct our classrooms and how westernized we may have become in doing so. It is important that our terms are relevant to those born outside of the U.S. It is important that emotional and social intelligence be acknowledged and rewarded in the context of different learning styles. And finally, don't force students to always work and partner with someone they don't know. And this is a little bit different about what we heard in the earlier panel. Beverly Tatum's book entitled Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria is a book about race and the salience of identity. Dr. Tatum discusses why students may have a comfort level sitting and learning with someone that looks like them, and this is a part of creating safe spaces for learning. Dean Sullivan and Dean Peterson talked a little bit about this, and I've talked a little bit about what, but haven't focused much on how at a practical level. This is intended as one example of how. This slide is from the Technical Assistant webinar to accompany the rollout of the newest 2016 Council on Education and Public Health Accreditation Standards. Note the shift away from core competencies to the language that describes foundational knowledge. Cultural competencies can be applied to these and also to the foundation, also applied to a shift away from discipline-specific and unintentionally siloed curricula. Culturally relevant content and experience can be applied to all 8 of these domains. I just want to mention very briefly something about teaching evaluations for this content. And it's just, this slide is just here to acknowledge that there's a myriad of scholarly literature published on the race and gender of sex or sexual orientation of an instructor and poor teaching evaluations, especially for courses that examine race, cultural ethnicity, and health disparities. I don't know how much of this will be covered on the panel here, but these are the scholars who can and will likely speak on an informed perspective about this. Bottom line, at the end of the day, this topic is about getting students to approach public health with a cultural lens that allows them to view the world differently, so the filter they use to practice public health can be and will be applied in culturally appropriate ways to change the lives of people where they work, live, and play. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
No problem. Excellent. Thank you very much, Linda. Next up, we have Lorraine Conroy. And Lorraine is going to talk about effective teaching in diverse classrooms. She's a professor of environmental and occupational health sciences at the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois, at Chicago. And I note in her bio that she has previously served as the Senior Associate Dean and Interim Dean of the School of Public Health, and as a result will have many great things to share with us squeezed into 7 minutes. Thanks very much for being here, Lorraine. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I do want to acknowledge my co-instructors and that I'm a little freaked out by the 7 minutes. So, so my co-authors are also the co-instructors for one of the courses that I'm going to spend most of my talk about today. The U.S. population is becoming increasingly multicultural. However, the relatively low proportion of minority faculty in schools of public health adds some complexity and challenges as the field aims to meet the needs of a diverse student body. While the term diverse is often used to refer to racial and ethnic minorities, and that's what we collect most of our data on, we're using a much broader definition of diversity, which we've shown here. Our chapter included a review of the literature and a case study examining one course in our MPH core curriculum. Today I'm going to present on the case study. We found 3 approaches to teaching and learning that are particularly important for diverse learners. We reviewed the literature related to these themes and then interrogated this course against those themes. Some of these things we've already heard about from previous speakers, so I'm going to hopefully save some time by not being too repetitive. Here's a little bit of background about our MPH class. We began offering an integrated MPH core curriculum in 2013, and it includes 3 courses. The case study I'm presenting today examined the design, delivery, and evaluation of one of these courses, the Determinants of Population Health, which is our course in the Determinants of Health and Health Equities. We spend quite a lot of time looking at health inequities. The 3 themes that we thought about were engagement, collaboration, and active learning. This is the first. We've already heard a lot about the benefits of these approaches. I'm not going to repeat that. But we also found that These, as we've heard from the previous speakers, these improve the performance of students, but the impact is even greater for diverse students or underrepresented minority students. So we've shown a typical class agenda here for our course, where students engage in small group discussion of assigned readings, followed by group presentations. We generally have a lecture, guest speaker, or class activity, and then time is reserved in each class for students to engage in individual reflective journaling. And unlike some of what the discussion was about the reflection, here we ask them to answer questions not just about how the class is going, but what they found interesting or surprising, or how it related to previous classes or to the work that they think they're going to do when they graduate. The second theme is related to evaluation, expectations, and support, and these are critical for student success. We set high expectations combined with efforts to validate students. We spend time at the beginning of the course, as others have described, to define expectations specifically related to class dialogue and group work. But we also include a lot of low-stakes assignments, so their group work may be frustrating, but it actually doesn't count as much. So there's not like one culminating thing. We do have rubrics and a lot of feedback. We use a mix of group and individual assignments, and we have teaching assistants and peer support leaders to provide additional student support. I'm going to skip that one. The third theme was really about implementing a culturally responsive curriculum, and this requires a focus on achievement and a student-centered approach. This approach places emphasis on connecting new knowledge and skills to previous experiences that in turn requires recognizing the social capital and expertise that students bring, understanding the role of culture, and placing emphasis on cultural humility rather than assimilation, but also raising socio-political consciousness by using a social justice approach. So this type of approach requires instructors to recognize how their position and privilege is brought into the classroom. It also requires the instructors and students to engage in critical dialogue about historical and contemporary issues, including entrenched disparities and institutional racism, and examines why and how education can be unjust, including policies and practices that privilege some students and disadvantage others. In order to engage effectively in critical dialogue, we sought consultation, as one of the previous speakers talked about, from our Dialogue Initiative, a campus resource that recognizes inclusion and differences as fundamental to learning in a pluralistic society. Their staff provided instructor training so that we could more sensitively address issues of student identity and inclusiveness in the classroom. One of our major goals of the course is to study the roots of health inequity. And we initially developed the course using a place-based approach. But we've reviewed, in 2017, we reviewed our experience with the course and decided that we really needed to move away from the focus on place and move further upstream. A major restructuring was conducted in fall of 2017, and we now follow the WHO conceptual framework for action on social determinants of health. This framework places greater emphasis on socioeconomic and political drivers of health inequities rather than the more proximal determinants of health, such as health behaviors. Our course uses a variety of class materials, such as peer-reviewed literature, TED Talks, newspaper and magazine articles, music, and also incorporate material from the Roots of Health Inequity interface to describe historical perspectives and current examples of discrimination and oppression and their relationships to ongoing health inequities. We do know that there are many challenges to adopting a student-centered, culturally responsive curriculum. Instructors may not know about the benefits of active learning. They may not trust the evidence because they see scientists who have succeeded with our current approach. They may feel intimidated by the challenge of learning new methods or fear that being identified as a committed teacher will reduce their credibility as a researcher. And many of them may want to maintain the control and safety that the front of the classroom provides, avoiding the chaos that other people talked about. But I think that the financial and administrative systems that support this are probably as important or even more important than faculty preferences. And these include our financial arrangements and how we distribute funds, things like class size, classroom design, and scheduling, expected expectations for promotion and tenure that de-emphasize teaching. But we also know that increased diversity in a culturally responsive curricula result in better outcomes. Learning requires social interaction, and that leads to, and diversity provides some of the discontinuity and social interactions that produce more active learning and thinking, and allows us to move beyond embedded worldviews. Integrated learning that builds new knowledge on previous experiences results in skills in intergroup relations and leads to students with more skill in critical inquiry, ability to constructively consider multiple perspectives, and increased pluralistic orientation, including a greater concern for the public good, which I think is what we're all hoping to achieve. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak today.
Excellent. Very well managed. 7 minutes. Sorry, I didn't realize that you were nervous about it. I didn't mean to draw attention to it, but thank you very much. It was really, really great. Next up, we are going to talk about managing difficult conversations. And I was reminded recently that someone posted something that said that the 3 characteristics of leadership are admit when you screwed up, admit when you don't know something, and be willing to have the difficult conversations that others are scared to have. And so I think, without question, we're going to hear from someone who is a leader in this area, and that's Yvette Cozier, or Cozier? Cozier? Yeah, so I come from a French-speaking country, so that's my inclination, but I did live in Boston for a year, so I learned, Cozier. So thanks, Yvette. And Yvette is Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion and Associate Professor of Epidemiology at the Boston School of Public Health. So thanks for joining us, Yvette. Look forward to your remarks.
So thank you very much. We've talked about the 7 minutes, so the real challenge here is that Sophie and I will split the 7 minutes, right? So if that's okay, so I'd like to bring up Professor Sophie Godley, who is Clinical Assistant Professor of Public Health and Community Health Services. So we're a team. We do this together quite a bit, so it's almost necessary that the two of us be here together. Let's see. So just to start, this is a quote from our dean, Sandra Galea, and what it really captures is that today it appears that almost every topic, whether academic or civic, is really a landmine, and that the slightest provocation can result in some sort of keg exploding. So more than other times, the forces outside of the classroom find their way into the classroom, and this results in difficult conversations. And with the background that our colleagues have just set up, as we aim to improve cultural competence and health equity and bring those into our classrooms, we also bring up many opportunities to have difficult conversations. Difficult conversations have a wide range of manifestations. They often and always will have some element of confrontation, and it can be minor, from asking a student to put away their electronic device or not, be on Facebook, or my favorite, shop for shoes, during class, right? That could be, or it could be something much more powerful that results in very tense group dynamics within the classroom, and these often center around topics of race, class, sexual and gender identity, and certainly these topics get heightened within our political climate today. Why is public health seem to be ripe for these conversations? Well, we are, as a field, diverse and multidisciplinary. Our instructors, as well as our students, come from a variety of backgrounds and a variety of experiences that bring them here to public health. They also come from a variety of racial, sexual identity backgrounds, class, and all of this comes into our class. What we are also challenged with, and what we try to emphasize, and what our students are increasingly demanding, is that we emphasize the social factors that structure health, rather than simply reporting health as disparities and differences. And Finally, as we start to unearth those truths that shape health, we have to talk about who actually is in our classroom, both in the student body and who teaches our classroom. And these represent a lot of the structural inequities reflected in our society, both domestic and international. So difficult conversations are inevitable, but what we'd like to get across in our few minutes is that they don't have to be destructive, that they can certainly be a part of learning, as Dean Cardarelli from University of Kentucky mentioned. This is part of growth, this is part of learning, and it's something that if we prepare for that, we can actually achieve both of those things.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be part of this panel and part of this day. I get to spend a whole day talking about my absolute favorite thing, which is teaching in public health. And my partnership with my friend and colleague, Professor Cozier, has just been absolutely life-changing in terms of my ability to teach effectively and really bring forward these questions about how do we do this and why do we do this. So it's one thing to say, yes, we need to take on structural inequalities, and it's another thing to have students crying, furious, tweeting, whatever it is that they're doing about their experiences in the classroom. But at the heart of it, and that's why we started with Dean Galea's quote, at the heart of it, we are compelled to do this, I believe, because it would be actually irresponsible if we don't send students out into the public health workforce equipped to handle this, equipped to think carefully about great diversity, to recognize their own privilege and the privilege of others, that privilege that is earned and that is wholly unearned, to think more about systems and less about individuals, to make mistakes and have them corrected, to correct and forgive mistakes made by others. What we often say is that if we can't hold one another accountable in a classroom, then how on earth are you going to do that in the real world? So that is important for both majority students and for students who are underrepresented and who will face these conundrums and these questions when they're out in the world. If you are not cognizant of your own privilege, when you go out into the public health workforce, I really believe you will cause harm. And we need to fundamentally open up these conversations where people are able to really get into what is hard and what is sometimes painful. So what are those moments? So there's a lot of kind of BuzzFeed-ish sort of talk about microaggressions, but microaggressions as we define them are the subtle insults, the subtle slights that are inflicted upon our underrepresented students, and that can often build up over time and cause enormous pain for students who are in our classrooms and are interacting with white and more privileged students who are ignorant to their own biases. So how do we do this? I want to just, in our very few seconds here, I want to just implore all of you, if you are not doing this, to really take what is often a big risk to open up these kinds of difficult conversations in your classroom, to talk explicitly about race and racism, to talk explicitly about sexual orientation and gender. You can do this by getting ready before classes start. You can weave your diversity conversations, difficult conversations into your orientation. You can use a common language. We've been really blessed and privileged to have Professor Cozier start a book club that all of our students read a similar text at the beginning, and that gives us a common language. You can put language in your syllabi. My friends, we're going to do hard things in this class. That's going to be okay. We're going to hold each other accountable. You can do things like that. Probably the hardest thing to do and the most important is to interrupt the oppressions and the microaggressions when they happen. And that is not always fun. And one of the things I like to say is that I am demonstrating for my white students how a white person can make mistakes and then fix them and then come to a reckoning, and that's not a bad thing. And then we reflect, we rework, we revisit. Being called on your stuff, being called out as a professor who has privilege is painful, and it's also humbling, and it's also, I think, critical to being effective in the classroom. So on this last note, I know I'm over time, I just want to mention something that happened in my class on Tuesday this week. So I have 100 beautiful undergrads on the Charles River campus, and they are in this public health class, and my not-so-secret agenda is to recruit them all, like leave pre-med and come to public health, right? So we try to be really engaging and have a really great time. And we were talking on Tuesday about race and racism and public health, and you know, they are ready. They are ready to do this. It's a very diverse class, and they are fully engaged. And I thought, well, let's talk about what's happening in the news right now. Let's talk about Stephen Clark. Let's talk about the situation in Sacramento. Let's talk about this epidemic, which is now endemic, of the killing of unarmed black men in our country. And so I brought up a clip about Stephen Clark, and his grandmother and his attorney, the attorney for the family, were presenting in Sacramento, and it was incredibly painful to watch. And just as we were showing this clip, a headline came over the top that's from CNN that said, there are not going to be charges pressed on the Alton Sterling case. So as we are looking at one horrific incident, another one is from a couple years ago is now being reported, the Baton Rouge police officer's situation. And it was so important to hold that space and let students feel what they felt about that and have a conversation about it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Yvette and Sophie, for that thoughtful reflection. So we've got a few minutes left for questions and discussion. Shall we start? Floor is open. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. There's a microphone right to your right. Yeah.
Hi, Perry Halkitis, Rutgers School of Public Health. So thank you all for your comments. Intersectional identities, right? People don't live in single boxes, right? And we tend to, when we talk about issues of diversity, compartmentalize people. How do you address these issues of intersectional identities with your students and in your curricula and in these difficult conversations you just talked about?
Go ahead. Were you directing to anyone?
Okay.
Okay. Well, whoever's ready to go for it. Yeah.
I'll start at least. So we embrace it head on, I think, in terms of it being one of the determinants of overall health that we have, categorized. We often report census data and other things, and in fact, we use the census as an example of how we categorize people and we ask students, well, how would you do this yourself? And it does bring up a lot of information about where people don't fit into these boxes very neatly. But that these sort of intersectional relationships have an even bigger impact on health and access to resources and other things like that. And then we use, literature that's been presented on those impacts as part of the required reading and discussion topics.
Did anybody want to add?
I would also say just having the basic conversations, even one building block at a time, brings you to a place where you can talk about the overlap and that people don't fit into simply one box. So just having the conversation at all is important.
I want to say, Dean Halkitis, I had a lot of that in my talk, and then when I rehearsed, it was 10 or 15 minutes long. But when I held up the slide about being biculturally gifted, and maybe bi is not the right word, this is just my own language, and this idea that we even talked about, we worked a little bit together in this so we wouldn't have great redundancy. But this, it kept coming to mind. People live in many worlds, and on some days it's important that I'm a senior associate dean and I have privilege. On Sunday I'm at church and I'm in that's a whole different world for me. Likewise for our students, if we don't want to put them in boxes, I think that was the whole point. And I tried to avoid this whole notion of this categorization, of people. And I think we've heard today over and over how much more it's important to talk about things in its entirety in terms of its space, because my students who are either other-oriented, regardless, they too don't want to be put in boxes, especially when it comes to making decisions about their future or developing interventions. And so you have to get our book. There's going to be so much more about this.
Just to add to what my colleagues have said, I think it's really important that white faculty acknowledge their own whiteness and talk about their own identities when possible. I always try to come out to my classes and talk openly as a gay faculty member and to be that person that is, public and open as an, anti-racist, working on it, white girl. I try to own that and be honest and clear with people. There are spheres in which I have great privilege and spheres in which I do not. I think that's important, and I think it's important for them to know who they are, and I think it's really critical we're not just teaching to the privileged, right? For students who experience multiple oppressions, they also need to know what's it going to mean when I go back to my community with a fancy MPH after my name, and how is that going to transform me from who I was before? So I couldn't agree with you more, and yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. In the blue top and then in the green, we'll try to do two more.
Leslie
Squeeze in.
Mandel, Regis College Public Health Program. So some of you alluded to this, but I think we need to think about diversity a little more broadly in that we're at a Catholic university. And just recently, I called out my university a little bit about, I'm not Catholic. And yet, while it's open and we talk about, all other religions, we start every meeting with a prayer. So, which is part of the culture and tradition, but it is something that I think we need to have a conversation about. And I'm just curious about any of your experiences with broadening the diversity conversation beyond color, gender.
Oh, absolutely. When you say the word diversity, most people equate that with race. Again, time. And so one of the things that I would say, even about this presentation, is that much of what we're talking about, even our colleagues on the panel before us, involves, quite a bit of time, actually years. If to be honest, when we tell students to go out in the community, we encourage them to think about, you're not going to go out there and in 2 weeks, understand them. So what you're talking about suggests that we need more time. And again, I would think having a 3-credit-hour course with fixed times, this is very difficult. So everyone from your administration has to be involved in terms of this dialogue so that we model that diversity is much more. And I often in classes, I'll say, when I'm in church at Sunday, most people, if I say that, think Baptist. Well, I'm Presbyterian. And so people don't get that. Like, how is that possible? Well, they let black people in. I also, here's another thing, and I think this is important. I also was going to start my presentation saying that for as long as I've been in academia, I've been openly black. I was going to say that as a nod to hearing Dean Halkitis talk at the ASPPH meeting. He was so inspiring. Then I thought about, will that come off as, insulting to people who've come out? So in those spaces, there's always a struggle because you're balancing this humor that another presenter talked about with the very sensitive issue and the whole getting beyond, well, my best friends are black, to a more legitimate conversation, about that.
So we can take, I think, one more quick one. Yes, right here in the black black jacket. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paola Painetti. I graduated from BU SPH a couple of years ago. My question is, with so many international students coming to the U.S. and so many U.S. students working abroad, what is the responsibility of schools of public health to bring in the ethics and the history of global health, I know it's a loaded question, into the classroom? Any thoughts?
In 1 minute or less, please.
So many thoughts. Briefly in our chapter, we address the imperative need for global health departments, all areas of public health to have some of these more difficult conversations. And this sort of irony of having, so often white, privileged, very young students who desperately want to do the right thing and desperately want to be, social justice warriors and carry on the good work. And at the same time, maybe woefully ill-equipped to do that and blatantly problematic in how they go about it. And that's a huge dilemma. And I think that's something that, again, I think we are in trouble if the only places that race and racism and privilege and globalism get discussed are in behavioral science, right? It's got to be in epidemiology. It's got to be in biostats. It's got to be in health policy and management. Environmental health is so rich with racial justice and thinking about those issues. So my hope is that we don't just have like the half-hour class on managing your privilege, right? But that we talk about it throughout the curriculum. It's not enough, Paula, but as you know, I appreciate your voice always.
All right. Thanks to all of our panelists and the great questions. And we're moving on to the next session.
And thank you, Jim.